Today, I wanted to take some time to talk you through how you can get the most out of your dermatology rotation. Maybe at this point you've decided to do a rotation in dermatology. So that means that you're going to spend 2 to 4 weeks most likely on the dermatology service at your hospital, and maybe you're curious how you can best prepare for this upcoming experience. So first of all, there are many different reasons why someone might rotate in dermatology. Some of you might be doing the rotation because you want to go into dermatology, and some of you might be doing the rotation because you just want to learn more about skin disease before you move on to whatever career you have in the future. That's actually how I got into dermatology in the first place. I thought I was going to be an internist. Actually, I thought I was going to be a cardiologist, and I wanted to do a derm rotation just so I would know more about skin before I started an internal medicine residency program. And now look where I am. I ended up loving it and ended up in a med derm program instead. Well, regardless of why you want to do your derm rotation, I'm excited that you're doing it because I always think that more people knowing about skin disease is a great thing since it's such a black box for so many physicians and practitioners out there. So the first thing I would tell everyone taking the dermatology rotation is not to worry. Even if you're thinking about going into dermatology, this should not be a high-stress situation. This should be a situation for you to explore the field and to make sure that this is something that you want to go into. The other thing I would say is that you don't have to feel like you're already an expert in skin disease. The point of the rotation is to teach you about skin disease. There's no expectation that you're going to go in and know everything because that would be kind of silly. Instead, my point of view is that the dermatology rotation is there to teach you about skin disease. It's really just about showing up with a good attitude and not worrying about knowing every single thing about dermatology before you even have started the rotation. So in that sense, I don't really think that it's something to worry about. No one's expecting you to come in as a semi-formed or fully formed dermatologist. Instead, I think what people are going to be looking for is looking for people that have the right attitude, that are excited to learn. Honestly, people are going to be looking to see how quickly you pick things up. When someone teaches you something about the skin, how quickly you're going to pick it up and remember it and apply it to the next patient that you might see in the future. So let's talk about resources that would be helpful for the rotation. Since it's only a 1-month rotation at most, I am a big proponent of trying to limit costs for our medical students. And so for that reason, I don't think you need to go out there and buy textbooks. I don't think you need to go out there and buy access to a question bank, anything like that. Instead, there are a ton of free resources that are available for you. First of all, the American Academy of Dermatology has an amazing set of slides and an entire curriculum that's built for medical students. In addition to that, don't forget that there are some dermatology textbooks that your institution's library might actually have access to. So before you go out there and buy anything, again, I don't think it's necessary for anyone to buy anything, but if you're gonna look for a textbook, first look at your institution's library. The other great resource is an app and a website called Visual DX. I'm not being paid for any type of sponsorship, but I do find that it's the most helpful for most people who are just starting in dermatology. It's nice because you can actually put in elements of your exam and it can help you build a differential diagnosis. It's not perfect, but it's a good place to start. It can be kind of costly for you to buy a subscription to Visual DX. And so the first thing to do is just to see if your institution has a subscription to it, because it is very, very helpful to use. The last thing I'm gonna do is plug Twitter. So I'm pretty active on Twitter. That's actually where I started getting interested in using social media for educational purposes. There's a lot of people who will put out tutorials. If you just go to my Twitter page, I pin at the very top of my feed all the tutorials that I've written, and it covers most of the major dermatology topics that you may want to read about. Each one is about 10 to 20 tweets long, so it's very short, it's very high level, and so it might be a good place to start, and then it could motivate you to go look for some other resources like primary literature. The last thing I'll mention is that UpToDate maybe 10 years ago was not very good for dermatology, but in the last 10 years, they've really grown their dermatology section, and so definitely check out UpToDate. So let's talk a little bit about the things that I think you should not have to do. So I've already said one, which is you should not have to buy textbooks. I just don't think that it's a wise investment of your money, especially if you're not going to go into dermatology. The second thing I would say is do not waste money on a derm light. A derm light is one of those fancy lights that dermatologists carry around. I brought mine here to take a look. This is a really old model of a derm light, but it works just fine. And the way a derm light works is that it can shine a bright light onto the skin, obviously, and it's actually polarized, and so it allows you to actually take a look at things without kind of the background glare. It just really focuses in on the primary morphology of that lesion. The problem with the derm light is that these are crazy expensive. This little guy costs I think over $800. So definitely don't spend money on a derm light. That's something that you can spend money on if you decide to go into dermatology, but certainly right now on a med student budget, not something worth spending money on. Instead, asked to borrow a derm light if there's an interesting dermatoscopic feature. There's a lot to be learned about dermoscopy, but at the same time, not something you need to learn during your med student rotation. It's something that you'll learn during residency. So let's talk about the ways that you can be a great medical student on your dermatology rotation. And a lot of these go without saying. These are the same things that would make you a great medical student on any rotation. As a faculty member, as a former dermatology resident, the thing I cared the most about when I had medical students was just that they were enthusiastic, they were excited to learn, they were present. I realized that the people that are there, the residents, the attendings, the nurses, they're all excited to teach you, so really take it all in. The other thing that I think is really good is to try to be as helpful as possible on your rotation. It's about preempting what you think the team is going to need. So for example, when I was a medical student in dermatology, I actually didn't know that I wanted to go into dermatology, but I knew what it was to be a good medical student. Let's say I was seeing someone in clinic. I'd go in, see the patient, do my normal thing, and then I'd notice something that looked pretty convincing for a basal cell carcinoma, and knowing my attending's practice pattern, I knew that he or she was probably going to biopsy it. I'd walk out ready to present, and if that attending was busy seeing another patient, that meant that I had a couple minutes to get things ready. I actually went back, I got the consent form, I filled everything out, I put the patient's label on there, it would be ready to go so that the attending or the resident and the patient can just sign on the dotted line, ready for the biopsy. And I think that's just a good example of just kind of predicting what you think is going to happen. And sometimes I'd be wrong, and that's okay. Then you just kind of secretly fold up your consent form and stick it in your pocket because no harm's been done. You haven't set up a biopsy, you haven't talked to the patient about it yet, but at the same time you've prepared. So just in case the attending says, you know what, we should biopsy that, you're ready to go with your consent form. And it's actually obvious that you already thought that it needed a biopsy too. And that actually leads into the other piece of advice I would say that everyone should try to do on your rotation, or really any rotation. Put your nickel down on something. It's a lot better for you when you present to your attending to say, you know what, I think that's a basal cell carcinoma, we should biopsy it today, as opposed to saying, you know, it could be a basal cell, I'm not really sure, maybe it's a weird looking AK or an angiofibroma, could you tell me if we should biopsy it? It's so much easier just to say, I think it's X, I think we should do Y, what do you think? Because that way you're putting your nickel down and the attending really gets a sense of what you think is right. Don't worry about being wrong. You are on a rotation and this is the time for you to learn. So attendings should be okay with you being wrong sometimes. And it's a lot easier as an attending to give you feedback and to help teach, especially if we know exactly what you think it is. And also knowing your thought process makes it even easier for us to walk through why you might have made that decision and why it might be the right decision or perhaps the wrong decision. The last piece of advice I'm gonna give for all of you that are going into dermatology. While you're on your dermatology rotation, this is a great time to, one, look for a mentor, look for someone that you identify with, look for someone that you really feel like is in your court, looking for you to succeed, really looking for you to excel as an applicant. In addition to that, also look for research projects. When you apply for a dermatology residency, your productivity in research is really important. And so for that reason, your dermatology rotation is a great place not only to look for interesting cases that you could publish as case reports or case series, but to actually think a little bit more creatively about possible research projects. Maybe you saw a patient where there was a question about what the right treatment should be. And this would be a great time for you to take a look at the primary literature to see if there's maybe a review article on it. And if there isn't one, maybe it's time for you to think about writing a review article. This is a great way to get started in research in dermatology, and a clinical rotation is always a nice place to have a jumping off point to start some research for the future. So these are just some generic tips that I've come up with for our medical students, and I hope that by sharing them, I can help all of you excel in your dermatology rotations in the future. It's not rocket science to be an amazing medical student. Really, it's about being enthusiastic, it's about being helpful, it's about being able to predict what's going to happen, and I think if you're able to do a little bit of that, you'll really shine as a student on your dermatology rotation. If you found this to be helpful, please consider hitting the like button below. If you find this type of information fun to listen to and beneficial, then consider subscribing as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. Good luck out there on your dermatology rotation. See you later. I'm realizing how ironic it is right now that I'm wearing a shirt that has a heart on it.